Welcome to RadioPalaciomagazine.com. We're speaking with Josh Butler, Executive Director of Housing Long Beach, in Long Beach.
That's right.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks for having me here.
For those of you who may not know, give us the elevator pitch version of what is Housing Long Beach.
Sure. Housing Long Beach is a nonprofit organization, and we advocate for more affordable housing to be built. We think there's a severe shortage of that. And we also advocate for renters' rights. And in Long Beach, renters don't have any rights. They can be evicted with no cause whatsoever, and they can have their rent raised as much as a landlord would like to raise it, with no limits.
I thought that was kind of an interesting, hold that thought, because I want to get back to that when we get into a little bit more about tenants' rights. There was an interesting article on Sunday, August 21st, in the Press Telegram, titled Downtown Long Beach Revitalization, Urban Renewal, or Economic Cleansing. A title that got my attention.
Indeed.
It was an article by Josh Delaney in the Press Telegram, as I said. And let me just quote from it for a second, and then I want to get your reaction. He's talking about an apartment building near Linden and 6th Street, which coincidentally is not far from your offices. As the landscape of the neighborhood changes, residents in the Linden building, such as Paula Lopez, who sells handmade tamales and lives with another adult and 3 kids, fear new property ownership will translate to rising rents and eventual eviction as investors in the area look to spruce up buildings and collect more money from higher income tenants. So officials talk about the wonders of development and revitalization, while affordable housing advocates promote gentrification and displacement. Which one is it?
Well, I think for us it's more than bemoaning it, it's actually witnessing it. And the reason that Ms. Lopez in that article is concerned about potential displacement at 611 Linden is because at 601 Linden, right next door to her at the corner of 6th and Linden, she witnessed displacement. She witnessed the entire displacement of everyone in that building. After the 6th Street lofts were completed, the corner building at 6th and Linden was sold, and all its tenants were evicted. So then their building has now been changed hands in terms of ownership and property management, and they're concerned as well. They used to have a landlord who would come by at the end of the month and collect the rent in person. Now they send their checks to a P.O. box in Culver City. So they're concerned that their fate will be the same of their neighbors.
Developers and landlords would argue that if they spruce up a property, they should be able to rent it at whatever the market will bear.
Indeed, and they do argue that. Their concern is the bottom line in their pocketbook, not the well-being of Long Beach residents. When those tenants are displaced, those tenants don't have anywhere to live. The cost of that displacement is borne by the rest of us taxpayers. So we're subsidizing their profit. So that's why Housing Long Beach thinks if tenants are going to be displaced, they should be entitled to relocation assistance. If they're going to be kicked out of their unit, if a building's going to be sold for $1.5–2 million and it's 10 units, then those tenants should be entitled to relocation assistance. That's a cost that either the buyer of the building can bear, or the seller of the building will have to bear. But to pass that on to the low-income residents and expect them to pay the cost, throwing them out into a market with a 2% vacancy rate, where they're going to have a challenging time finding anywhere to live to begin with, anywhere near the rent they're paying, they won't be Long Beach residents anymore. So while they witness the change of downtown, when it's completed, we throw them aside.
So let's talk a little bit about protections here a second. So let me try to understand. So if I live in an apartment building and I hear through the grapevine that the building is going to be sold, how much advance notice can I get that, okay, you've got 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Do I even get notice of that kind?
If you've been living in the building for less than a year, you have to have a minimum of 30-day notice. If you've been living in the building for more than a year, whether that be 2 years, 7 years, or 10 years, or longer, it's 60 days notice. So for a lot of the tenants at 601 Linden, they were given 60 days notice. There are a few who are given 30.
Are there any other protections I have besides giving me reasonable notice.
No, and it's less than that. Not only do they just have to give you reasonable notice, they don't even have to explain why they would be doing that. You could be the perfect renter. You could pay your rent on time. You could follow the rules of the lease. You could fix your own. You can repair your own problems. Nevertheless, the landlord can give you that notice and doesn't have to explain why. Landlord can raise your rent as much as they want. It doesn't matter.
Does that apply? Okay, this is for a building being sold. What if
Sure.
it's just a building? I mean, I'm just living in this apartment building, and can I be thrown out at any time for
Yes.
any reason?
Yes.
Literally.
We have seen that happen. Again, at 601 Linden, the building was purchased as soon as the 6th Street lofts were completed. Within a month or two, the entire third floor was given notice.
Right, but I'm just saying for
Yeah.
those, I'm talking about, let's say I'm in a building where it's not being sold. I'm just, just regular, now we're just moving into tenant protections.
Yes, you could be given notice. Again, there doesn't need to be a reason why. So whether the building's being sold or not, or whether or not, we have tenants who, we had a tenant here in the 4th District who complained about a broken air conditioning unit in his building, in his apartment rather, and the landlord, rather than fixing it, served him notice. And we see that all the time. We have, tenants who are afraid to say anything because they're afraid their rent will go up. They're afraid they'll be given notice, and being given notice in a market with a 2% vacancy rate, that's a tough blow to take.
So even if I'm the best tenant you've ever had, and I've made a request, I think a reasonable request to make some, the plumbing went out or whatever, you're saying that I can just be, literally thrown out, or do I have to be given notice?
You have to be given proper notice.
Okay.
Again, if you've been living there for 5 years as the perfect tenant, your landlord, you cross your landlord for whatever reason, even if you didn't suspect that you did, that a simple request for repairs was going to create that situation. But the landlord could say, I don't want to make the fix, I'm going to evict the tenant. So we have tenants who literally called me this morning complaining of bed bugs. And this was a on-site property manager who's complaining of bed bugs that can't get the owner of the building to pay for proper
Fumigation.
fumigation. Thanks. And it's multiple.
How many
units.
people know this? Do tenants know this?
A lot of tenants don't know this. A lot of tenants, when they'll call us.
I
and
didn't know it.
A lot of tenants will call us and say, my landlord just gave me 30-day notice. My landlord just gave me a 60-day notice. Can they do that? Well, yes, they can do that. And we'll talk to them a little bit more and try and find out the circumstances, try and find out if there's any defense for them. There is very little. The landlords will say that tenants have recourse in court. That's oftentimes after the tenant's been evicted. What are they taking? And the tenant also needs to be able to afford legal representation. A lot of tenants end up in eviction court with no representation, and they usually get wiped out. Once the tenant's been evicted, then they can claim wrongful eviction. But if they haven't been evicted yet, they can't go to court. So the landlords like to raise that up and say, tenants have recourse in court. But that's a misnomer. They have recourse in court after they've been displaced.
Well, what good is it then?
Exactly. That's why many cities.
And what would you do when you went to that court?
Well, usually it doesn't typically occur, and that's why many cities have passed just cause eviction protections for tenants, because they know that the tenants don't stand a chance, and not only don't stand a chance in eviction court, very few of them actually make it to sue their landlord for wrongful eviction. So cities like San Diego and Glendale and Los Angeles, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley have all passed just cause eviction protections. Seattle has passed just cause eviction protections. And this allows tenants to be able to ask for something to be repaired without being afraid that they're going to be retaliated against, without being afraid that they're going to be kicked out.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about protections, and then I want to shift into two programs, one of which exists and one of which you would like to see happen. We're speaking with Josh Butler, Executive Director of Housing Long Beach, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation.